Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our conference of the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. Together with the think tank Diskurs.am, we organized today's international conference on taxation, justice, and economic development. I'm very glad to welcome to Armenia Mr. Dragan Tevdovski, who is the Minister of Finance of the Republic of North Macedonia, as it is now called, who's still giving interviews over there in the corner and will join us on the panel shortly. I'm very glad to welcome Mr. Anton Marcinčin, who is Senior Advisor at the Ministry of Finance of the Slovak Republic. And I'm glad to welcome Mr. Beka Natsvlishvili from neighboring Georgia, who's a member of Parliament and Deputy Head of the Commission on European Integration in the Parliament of Georgia. Not on the panel, but in the room is Mr. Norbert Walter Borjans, who was Minister of Finance of the biggest German state of North Rhine-Westphalia and became very well known all over Germany for his fight against tax evasion. I won't hide the fact that if we provide these platforms for discussion, we do that on the basis of certain values. We are the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. We are a social, democratic, political foundation from Germany. And our core values are freedom, justice, and solidarity. Coincidentally, the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, was in Germany a couple of days ago and gave a speech where he said, freedom, justice, and solidarity are the values of the Armenian Velvet Revolution. And what we are trying to do today is to discuss whether the planned tax reform in Armenia is compatible with these values, freedom, justice, and solidarity. Of course, you can organize several conferences and seminars just on these three words. What is freedom, what is justice, and what is solidarity? I will just focus or mention two things. The one thing on solidarity is that in our understanding, in my personal understanding of the word, solidarity means that the powerful, the strong, the rich carry a higher share of the burden than the poor people in a society. And for the word freedom, I would like to quote the former German Chancellor and former chairman of the Social Democratic Party, Willy Brandt, who once was asked what next to peace for him is the most important. And his answer was, for me, the most important value is freedom. And he said, freedom for many, not only for the few, freedom of conscience and of opinion, freedom as well from need and from fear. So basically, in my own words, how I understand this, Willy Brandt said, and this distinguishes social democrats from liberals, maybe, you cannot be free if you're poor. And the question is, if you want a state to fight poverty and to create more justice in the society, I would think that state needs money for that. Yeah? What is needed is budget funds. And this is what we're going to discuss today, where for all the things that the new government plans and which is discussed in Parliament today, where are the funds supposed to come from? And I wish you a very interesting discussion. I thank all of you for being here, especially our international guests, and I wish you an interesting and fruitful conference. So thank you very much, and with that I would hand over to our partner, Vahram Soghomonyan, for the introduction.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Vahram Soghomonyan. I am from Political Discourse think tank. You are probably familiar with it. We have Diskurs.am website where we have political, economic, and other types of analysis, and we also have done a number of translations. We have published a number of books. Armenia, after this revolutionary changes, is now searching for its economic way of development, and one of the slogans of the April-May revolution was solidarity, and tax reforms that the government has started discussing, we have now public discussion of this, and we're going to talk about this, are supposed to have in their focus solidarity, fairness, fighting against inequality, because the public rose against inequality, and one of the purposes of the revolution was to fight inequality. So discussion of whether we should have progressive or flat is a very heated discussion. We have invited a number of representatives of a number of countries who have been through this experiment. We would like to hear from them what were their expectations and what they ended up with. The examples of Macedonia, Slovakia, Georgia are quite interesting. In Georgia, they have a lot of heated discussions right now on the parliament level about returning to progressive taxation. And it's important for these discussions not to be limited to specialists only, because the way we see it, economic policy should also be discussed by the public. It should be a subject on which the public is engaged. I'm very happy that we have been able to have such representative delegations from other countries, and I wish everyone successful and productive discussion. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to thank Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung and Political Discourse think tank for this very important initiative. I'd like to also thank the guests for giving us their time and for their willingness to share their experience with us. We have very good level of delegations here from countries that are comparable to Armenia in terms of challenges and in terms of their objectives. I think this discussion is going to be very useful on the road towards tax reforms that we have planned. I would like to thank you also for participation. You're probably aware that last year in July and August already, there have been active discussions of very ambitious tax reform on an unofficial level in different working groups. There are different directions that can be pursued, and those things that are supposed to be done in the short term are mostly reflected in a draft law on amending the tax code, which was already submitted for public discussion, and I think many of you are probably familiar with as experts or representatives of civil society. I'm not going to talk about the main directions of this reform, because today we're going to talk about the changes in the system of income taxation. It's one of the most important changes that is proposed in the tax reform. As you know, at the moment in Armenia we use progressive system of income taxation, different tax rates, which we think is very much in line with the principles of distribution of wealth and solidarity. No one doubts this, because if you try to doubt this, you wouldn't have enough arguments. This is backed by science and practice, but let's try to understand what is the real system that we have. And it's not new, it has been there for 10 years, more than 10 years already. We have nominally progressive system, which in reality is not quite progressive, and it's not new. It was not a result of adopting the tax code. Before the tax code, there was a law on income tax, which also have this three-tier system, or three different tax rates. The difference between the first and the second tax rate was very insignificant, but these two tax rates covered 98% of taxpayers, and only 1.2 or 2% of taxpayers paid the 36% rate, that is for income over 2 million drams. So in reality we didn't have a progressive system. With the adoption of the tax code, I think the situation has improved a little, and the system became a little more progressive. The difference between the first two rates became larger. It was 5% instead of 1.6% before, the difference, which made the taxation system a bit more progressive. But our analysis shows that even now the system is far from being a classical progressive system, because 65% of taxpayers earns under 150,000 drams a month. At least that's what it's declared. Even if it's not de facto the case, this is at least what's declared. And this group of people gets only 32% of the total income. The next income bracket or group, from 150,000 to 2 million drams per month, about 32 or so % of taxpayers are in this second group, and they get about 60-61% of the total income. And only 2.5 or 3% of taxpayers make more than 2 million drams a month. This is a signal that the use of progressive system as it is now creates certain problems, and the biggest problem is the underreporting of real income. But this is not the only problem that made us think about having a flat rate. We think that a labor tax in Armenia is quite high, which also affects competitiveness of our national economy, because when your cost is increased because of the salaries, then the exported products become not competitive. And during meetings with international organizations, investors and all this question is always raised, and parallels are shown with countries, neighboring countries, not so neighboring countries, members of the union, non-members of the unions. And the first thing that everyone says is that the labor tax is high in Armenia. And this is one of the main reasons that made us think about reducing the tax burden, income tax burden. The purpose of doing this is to address more long-term objectives, make Armenian products more competitive, make profits more significant. Because when you look at the structure of the economy by profitability, we are not in a very good condition. Those branches of the economy that are for export are much less profitable than the branches of the economy that are working on the domestic or for the domestic market. This doesn't encourage long-term investments, especially in the private sector, and it doesn't really promote exports or economic growth. Another important thing I would like to mention, if I have time, there are two components of taxing physical persons. One is taxing income, one is taxing property. Income, if you tax income at a lower rate, that creates savings. Some of the savings is used to acquire property, and then countries start taxing this property through property tax, luxury tax, inheritance tax, whatever different tools. So it's a matter of choice. Either we continue to have high labor tax and have a property tax system that is not fully developed, or proceed a different way, reduce the income tax burden and focus more on using a property tax potential fully. There is a third way, of course, that you can mention probably, to use both, but we think that it's not a good idea to use both. I also prepared a little presentation with numbers, diagrams that can show the situation, but I think we can do that during the discussion. Thank you.
My great privilege that I am for the first time in your beautiful country. I come here as a friend, thanks to the Friedrich-Ebert-Stiftung. I come because FES supports strongly the process of creation of reform ideas in my country in the past period. They provide us excellent expertise of the German experts, but also international, and we manage with their support to push and to make reform processes in my country. I will present the Macedonian or now North Macedonian example, because we changed from progressive to flat taxation, and then starting from 2019 we again return to the progressive. I will provide you some data about the most important things. So generally my presentation consists of three parts. So about the flat taxation in my country, then how we reintroduce and why progressive taxation, and some takeaways that maybe are useful. First, I want to just to make a comparison. I was also surprised. For example, if we compare the Macedonia with Armenia, you could see that that nominal GDP is almost the same. Also, if you compare the data about the GRU economy, 36% here, 13% Macedonia, so we are also comparable in this amount. Unemployment rate, 18.9% here, and in my country, 21.1%. We are also not far in this figure. General government revenues, maybe this is the difference. Here is 21.8% of GDP. In my country is 29%. Debt level, there is a difference. 52% here and 41% in my country, with pace of growth also different. Trade deficit is almost the same. Also, FDI attraction, 2.2% of GDP here in Armenia, in my country, is 3.4. This, in order to know what is the comparison. Also, according to the population, Armenia is somewhat bigger, but not significantly to Macedonia. Okay, how flat taxation happened in Macedonia? There was a change of the government. In that time, a right-wing government introduced the flat taxation. I must say this, that in that period, especially Southeastern Europe and Central Eastern Europe was crazy in the flat tax. There was a race, now the scholars said, a race to the bottom of introduction of flat taxation and lowering the tax rates. 7 countries before us, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Russia, Slovakia, Ukraine, and Romania, they introduced flat taxation, and Macedonia decided to introduce flat tax starting from 2007. How? So until then we had the progressive system with 3 marginal rates, 15, 18, and 24, and from 2007 the personal income tax, PIT, lowered to 12%, and also in the same time corporate income tax was lowered to 12%, and the next year both were lowered to 10%. So flat taxation both in PIT and CIT with 10% flat rate. Why? So these were the explanations that were used everywhere in the Central and Eastern and Southeastern Europe. Simplify the tax regime, make it easier for people and businesses to calculate taxes, reduce the GRU economy, also promote the country as the country with low and simple taxation. The idea was to attract significantly the FDIs. Also, the idea was that this will increase the GDP. And now I will show you the outcomes. The graph is from the Schneider, so probably most important scholar about the GRU economy in the world today. You could see that the GRU economy stayed around 30%. So there was no significant reduction, but the line is without decreasing pace. We now, especially in the past 2 years, implement different measures, not in the reduction of taxes, but in improvement of the tax administration, fight against the cash payment of the society in order to reduce the GRU economy. About the FDI, you could see that there was no effect of the flat taxation of the FDIs. So I make comparison period with the progressive system and period with the flat taxation. The average of the period of the progressive system is 4.9% of the GDP, inflow from FDI, and the period with the flat taxation average is lower, 4.1%. I must say that the period of flat taxation is also period of global financial crisis, so this also influenced this data. But as I said, the countries, especially in the Balkans, in this period were in the race to the bottom in lowering taxation, and they use. It was not important progressive or flat. They use huge benefits especially to the FDIs in order to come and to be attracted in the country. When I say huge, so zero taxation in the long periods. In most of the cases of 10-year period that these countries provide. So I write here that also when you think about changing of taxation, also it's important behavior in our countries, your competitor countries in the region. Okay, about the GDP growth, here it's obvious that also the GDP growth was not promoted, but in contrary, this was period of a reduction of the GDP growth. So it was lower after the flat tax. What is very important that we faced significant decline in the personal income tax revenues. So the first period is the average of the PAT is 2.7% of GDP, and the period with the flat taxation is characterized with 2.2% of the GDP. So basically, we lost 0.5 percentage points of the GDP with the introduction of flat taxation. This is, I want to bring your attention that this is very important when we start to think why want to again to return progressive, because flat tax provides, so make a reduction of the highest of the best earners in the economy. So this is decrease of their obligation to pay taxes, and with it, the country does not have enough money to pay for the most important services, for example, for health, for the social transfers or education. Also, it is important. I want this also to underline that in that period, the government start to introduce many quasi-fiscal measures in our system in order to try to make revenues, because it was obvious that flat tax lost the budget revenues. The same is about the overall government revenues. So it is obvious that this period, this was paradigm and mantra. We had in this period mantra that only low taxes are good taxes, and that for the citizens it's good if they only pay low taxes, which is also dangerous, because if we want to have a better country, better educational system, better social system, better health, public health, the country needs financing. If the story in the country is that only low taxation is good and the citizens want not to pay taxes, this is a problematic story for the future of the country. What is most important? So you could see that in my country, inequality was, since independence till the period of introduction of the flat taxation, it was flat. So no dramatic changes in the inequality, income inequality, and introduction of the flat taxation significantly increased the income inequality. I present here the top 1% share of income. So the income of the 1% people in the economy with the highest income, and you could see that their share in the income, it was 6.3%, comparable with the most countries in my region, and then with the flat taxation, it skyrocketed to 12.2%. It was doubled for a very short period of time. It means that distribution of the income goes to the people with the highest income, and that the redistribution mechanism of the income taxation was missing in the country. About why is this important? I make here comparison with other countries in the region. With this data, we became the country with the highest inequality in Europe. And this was one of the most important things why I decided to change back to the progressive taxation in order to provide us possibility the redistribution of taxation to work. And of course, this is important. I already said this make our revenues to be one of the lowest in the region. And therefore, we decide to reintroduce the progressive tax. So we add another marginal rate. And I want to underline that it is important with new introduction of the progressive taxation, we make a much stronger taxation of the capital. So in the past, before 2006, when we have a progressive taxation, it was mainly focused on the labor, and when we decide starting from this year to reintroduce, we introduce tools in order the taxation of the income from capital to be much harder taxed, because the most wealthiest people in the society, they are not living from the labor but from the income from capital. At the end, I want to say that it's not only Macedonia who live the flat tax, but also 2013, this was Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Montenegro. 2014, it was Albania. 2018, Latvia. We were 2019. Also, we are now, there is also discussion. I heard here that it's also in Georgia and also in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosnia and Herzegovina discuss to leave the flat tax. I have some other insights, but I respect the organizers, so I will stop. Maybe I will say this during the questions. Thank you.
I am economist. My question is to the Minister of Finance of Macedonia. As we understood that when you had introduced flat rate and you reduced the tax to 10%, I understand that this is the kind of minimum standard for the European region, as a result of which the general contribution to GDP also declined. In our case, it is more than double of that rate, and it relates to, the change relates to 65%. 65% is not going to have any change. 23% will be kept in the upcoming 3-4 years, and then it will be reduced by 1 or 2%. Okay, flat taxation. In case of Macedonia, I see that maybe you should have left it at 12%, not reduced to 10%. And in that case, maybe you wouldn't feel this really negative impact on GDP. In our case, for instance, just for comparison, let me tell that in the Eurasian region and also vis-a-vis our close neighbors, the income tax in here is highest. In Russia, it is 13%, the income tax rate. In Kazakhstan, it's 12%. In Belarus, 12%. And in Armenia, it is 23% as of now. And this 23% is quite high, which results in grey economy, informal economy, as well as there is no actually indicator to improve the business activity. Hello, I am from the Foundation of Right Protection and Right Development. I am a lawyer. My question is to Mr. Arman Poghosyan. Am I right in my understanding that the justification for flat taxation is that we cannot put in place effective mechanisms to administer the revenues and to administer to the tax administration. Therefore, we have decided to bring everyone under the same umbrella, under the umbrella of the same tax rate. Suren Barsoyan, from responsible from an economic analysis agency. Mr. Poghosyan spoke about flat taxation, but he didn't speak about indirect taxes, excise tax and VAT, about increasing or enhancing the tax base for VAT and excise tax, which is in fact a regressive approach. So it turns out that low-income earners in the future will have to pay higher indirect taxes. So in Macedonia, how was this process organized in terms of indirect excise taxes? Were they raised in parallel? This is very important because it is creating an additional social burden for our public, and low-income people, of course, have the right also to have one glass of wine or bottle of wine, although our prime minister doesn't think so. So in terms of distribution of the tax burden, your comment, please. Anna Nazarian. I'm a regular citizen. My question is to Mr. Poghosyan. You mentioned that according to your estimations, for decade, the taxation system that has been in place for decades now was only nominally progressive. So my question, why the government didn't want to really make this progressive, it's really progressive and actually progressive? Why didn't you improve the progressiveness of it? Anait Kalastyan from the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs. So I'm happy to ask a question to my former colleague, more of an informative nature comment. Mr. Poghosyan mentioned that labor tax is quite high in Armenia vis-à-vis other countries. So my question is more for clarification. So when we compare this tax to other countries, did you mean that in other countries there are different types of fees for implementation of social right, and labor tax includes not only income tax but also, as we say in our terms, the right for pension, age pension and others. So my question is as follows: when we compare the tax rates, do we take into consideration that in Armenia under income tax, we implement also other social rights, whether in other countries the income tax, actually other mandatory fees or payments are added to the income tax, and then the salary structure is defined. So when we make international comparisons, I encourage the international experts to take into consideration that our income tax also includes social component. Am I right? You are from the NGO or representative of development of rights. So the question, I understood the question as follows. So one of the main reasons of proposing such amendments is that it was not possible to do effective tax administration in the context of progressive taxation. This is, of course, there is such a thesis, but this is not the only one. There are other reasons behind it as well, specifically to reduce the tax burden for labor, plus, in addition, to improve the competitiveness. But still, yes, this is one of the key reasons, because the statistics that 65% of persons employed declare only up to 150,000 AMD monthly revenue income leaves us with the idea that tax brackets prompt or misdeclaration and in this regard, both in the public sector and in the private sector, we see even slow the tendency of higher salaries. So if there wouldn't be this misdeclaration, the picture would have been that they would have declared more income but this is not the case. So I want to take this opportunity to reflect on some other points as well. Sometimes there is a counter argument against us that if you wish, if you hope that by flattening or equalizing the labor tax and coming up with 23% of income tax, and thereby you hope that the shadow or informal salaries will be misdeclared, not properly declared. There is such a fear, but there are at least three reasons for declaring lower salaries. Generally, the income tax is declared once a month, whereas the profit tax is reported once a year. Only 11-12% of our taxpayers are paying turnover taxes, and 90% are under alternative taxation schemes, and they don't have any problem to underreport. So this around 40% out of this 11-12% is operating with tax losses that have been accumulated from the previous years. So the expectation is not only that by equalizing the tax rates, the salaries will be properly reported, but I share this thesis that yes, this is one of the reasons. About the second question, why didn't we try to take another path and to make the system really progressive? This is a good wish, good desire. I fully agree with you. If it wouldn't request disproportionate administration cost that is not justified, and if we wouldn't have the high tax burden for salaries, we would have taken that path, meaning undertaking all possible measures to ensure reporting of the real amount of the salaries and to have really progressive taxation model. In my personal opinion, don't take this as the viewpoint of the government, because this has not been fully discussed. In my personal opinion, even if there is a discussion and the national parliament approves this initiative and we put in place flat taxation, at some point in time in the future we will go back, or at least discuss going back to progressive taxes. But we need to use this period of time to enhance our national competitiveness as the first step. Second, to use this time to improve our tax administration system to get really prepared for the progressive taxation. And about the third question, my colleague raised an important question, in the sense that we have to arrive at comparable conditions. So naturally, we are taking this fact into consideration. Russia, although applies 13% income tax, but the social income component is quite a high burden on the salaries. And although there is a hypothesis that social payments should not be viewed as taxes, because under different pension schemes they are being collected to personal accounts and used in the future. But still, if we are talking about the revenues of today, we should take into consideration the social payments, security payments as well. And therefore, we have tried to arrive at some comparable or compatible situation. When I say that the burden on salaries is high, I don't mean only the income tax. I also mean the social security payment, which actually reduces the income.
Thank you very much. Mr. Tevdovski, your opportunity to react to the questions addressed to you.
Thank you very much for the 3 questions. I think they are highly relevant. The first about the level of the taxation of labor, for example, here and in my country. So 10% PAT rate in Macedonia is not comparable with here. In order to be comparable, we must add the social contributions. For example, in my country, there are social contributions are 25%. So in total, the burden on the labor is 35%. And it is much higher than here, where the social contributions are 5%. So in current system, for the majority of the population is 23 or 28 plus 5, so it is lower than Macedonia. So when it was introduced in Macedonia flat taxation, it is obvious that it made a reduction of the taxes on the wealthiest citizen, and therefore in that period right-wing government decide also to reduce the percentage for the lower paid or the ordinary citizen. So this was the reason why we finish with the 10% flat rate. So I must say, because I mentioned this during the presentation, when we reintroduce, we significantly, for 50%, we increase the taxation of capital, incomes from the dividends, from the rents, from the capital gains. Why? Because the top earners in the economy in my country live not from the labor but from the incomes from the capital, and we decide to tax them more. Also, I want to mention maybe what is important and what most of the European countries have it is tax allowance. So they have progressive system of taxation, but they introduce, for example, it is also in my country, there is a personal tax allowance on salary, on the nominal terms, which makes the low-paid wage earners to have proportionately much higher, in relative term, much higher reduction of the taxes than the highest earners in the economy. So also there are in some countries there are child allowances that make reduction of the PAT taxation, especially to the labor force. About the indirect taxation in Macedonia, the VAT was not, the rate was not increased because there was a lot of debate about that, because we know that it is indirect taxation, and the indirect taxation in general makes the poor people and the people with the low wage to pay proportionally higher taxes with the VAT than the wealthiest one. But we try, not only in my country but in other countries in the region, to fight this VAT collection to be improved because of the grew economy. Most significant that we made now, it is a reduction of the limit for cash payment in the society. So we make a reduction from 15,000 euros to 1,000 euros, and we plan to reduce to 500 euros. So nobody to significant amount cannot pay with cash. In order to fight with the growth economy, we have some other measures in order to support this, but this is not connected directly with the PAT or VAT, but just fight against the growth economy. Thank you.
we turn to the Slovak experience. Slovakia, EU country that had a flat tax, was very attractive, successful in attracting FDI, and decided to abolish the flat tax. I think that is also an interesting and a relevant experience. Anton, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes, and then it's Beka's turn, and then we will have a collective discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, it's really exciting time in Armenian history, and literally it's very exciting because your government is just today that is, has submitted its program manifesto to the parliament. And I'm quite sure it will contain issues like education, for instance. And that's probably the most important in every country, investment to the future. It certainly will contain issues like economic policy, infrastructure, which is necessary to build, public services, quality, amount of public services. And we all know that this costs some money, that we need to finance this. And now I ask you, who is happy to pay taxes? Who is waiting for February to fulfill tax declarations and say, yes, now I pay taxes? Well, probably very few of us. But at the same time, we know that that is the right thing to do. It's simply very right thing to do, to pay taxes, because it makes sense. It makes sense to contribute, to share, to be part of the community, of the country, and to see that something is happening, that we are financing something we are getting in exchange for our money. And of course, everybody has to pay taxes. You cannot expect too much from poor people, but you should expect probably much more from rich people. I mean, who can pay it? Well, poor people cannot really pay too much, so only rich people then remain like rich like us and richer and so on. But it has to do with expectations, with trust, and with experience. So it's not easy to switch from a regime that you would say, well, maybe I can avoid paying taxes, to the regime that you say, yes, this is the right thing, I pay taxes. And it's right to pay taxes. So of course it's a challenge. I think it's a challenge for all governments in transition economies to come to the point that we pay taxes and we take it as something very normal and usual. But for that we need institutions. And I will mention institutions several times in my presentation. I'm happy to share our experience. Now, the situation in Slovakia, just to understand, was not easy. We were a black hole, the black hole of Europe. Our fellows were entering European Union and NATO, and we were left outside because we did many tricks with privatization and other revenues. And the thing was that we did not have institutions. So, for instance, voucher privatization is something very nice, but if you don't have institutions, it simply won't work. So then in '98, the change came, and we had to do something very fast and something very bold to show that, no, we mean it seriously. We do want to become a member of European Union together with Poland and Baltic states and Hungary and Czech Republic. We do want to become members of NATO just to ensure sort of like security issues, which are important also for FDI. And so we had to do something very bold, and maybe that was the main reason why government that was elected in 2002 came with the idea of a flat tax. Now, we introduced flat tax, 19%, and we had good results in general. You see that we experienced some restructuring of our economy, especially by car industry, although the national part and the government part was lagging behind, and we were talking about dual-track economy, where you have these foreign enterprises paying well, doing real business, and then you have rest of the economy, which is really falling behind. And recovery of labor market was not very fast, but yes, it was happening. So there were some nice results, and especially what we are proud of is that we are catching up in terms of GDP per capita in purchasing power standards. So you see this first picture. I made them small so nobody can read it. Of course, it's always an intention, because then you have to trust me what I'm saying. But yes, there is a catching up. Even labor productivity is improving, so this is also good. Of course, the salaries are increasing, but not that fast that we would like to see. So, furthermore, however, at the same time, we finance our public service and public goods by deficit all the time. Since '93, we are always in red figures. Despite the nice growth before 2008 crisis, despite the nice growth of last years. So what's happening? Well, even I don't see these pictures from here. You see general government revenues and general government expenditures. After our tax package in 2003-2004, our revenues actually continue to fall. Well, of course, then what can you do? Then you say that actually doesn't matter, that we didn't want to raise revenues, we just wanted to make nicer system. And then they actually increased. But you see expenditure, it was never enough to finance all the needs. So let me now introduce you very briefly what our 19% flat tax was about. Well, it was simple, transparent, had no exceptions and exemptions. Wonderful thing for all Excel users. I'm saying Excel users because my German friends maybe know the author of flat tax, who is Mr. Sulik, quite European MP, quite popular also because of his articles in German press. And he can use Excel. And so he calculated this. So it's nice, but then okay, you know, we abolish some taxes. So it looks like very nice, right? It's no problem, it's just very simple. The only problem is that, well, and it's easy. You just change legislation, basically. It's easy to remember. It's just perfect. The problem is that if you do this exercise, you have to increase some other taxes. So we increase at the same time excise taxes, we played with social contributions, and we played with other stuff. So, but we gained some positive attention. That was important. We gained positive attention from The Economist, Financial Times, some articles, you know, go to Slovakia, things are really happening there, so it's promised land, which was good. And it really mobilized society in a positive way, because we thought, yes, now we have something, we are doing it among the first ones, if not the first country to adopt flat tax. So this was important and positive. But for instance, European Central Bank was less excited and told us, well, it's not that much about rates, like it's about tax base, definition of tax base, and about institution, ability to collect taxes. And it's about the whole system of taxes. Because it's nice to play with one particular tax, but we have other taxes too that we pay. So what matters is total tax burden, not only how much I pay from my income. So they were less excited, and Martin Wolf was less excited, saying that maybe it's good for some countries. But for instance, exemptions and exceptions have or may have some good reason why we have them in the tax system. So for instance, yes, we kept tax allowance, which made system more progressive on income tax. And yes, we introduced child bonus to provide some incentive to families so that at least one member of the family is employed in legal economy to collect bonus for children. So some incentives were there, some exceptions, if you like, but others were abolished. And that was not easy because then you have all the problems with particular social groups. And I think the real problem is that it switches attention of the government and general public from the real issue, which is institutional side and taxes as such, including real estate tax and so on. And everybody is talking just about rates, whether 19 or 17 or 12 or 21, what is better. In the meantime, you see, so we escaped from income tax, and we are in the point that more than 40% of general government revenues are social contributions. And this is real burden on labor, not taxes. And I can tell you a few figures because you are all professionals. 1,000 euro salary, social contributions 134, taxes 104. So about 13% contributions, 10% effective rate taxes. So 23, 24%. But for the company pays another 35% social contributions. So the labor cost is actually 1,350 for somebody to get 760. You see the difference between 1,300 and 760. Similar is for minimum salary, 520 euros, where actually you pay on taxes only 26 euros, but on social contributions, 66, almost 3 times more. So is it so important, after all, at least in Slovakia, to talk so much about income tax and about different rates and different arrangements if at the end you pay 66 compared to 26 on social contributions? And of course now it's quite difficult to change and to depart from 40% of revenues made by social contributions. Now the World Bank is saying rates are fine, but what matters are institutions, because it's costly for companies to pay taxes. And that's what companies are saying. Yeah, I mean, we can play around different tax rates. We have good imagination. Tax optimization is fine, but it just takes too long time. We have to employ too many people. Changes are too frequent. And so for us, cost of compliance is just too high. And this is a problem. So institution. And so in 2030, we said flat tax was not bad, but we can do better. So we abolished this. We have now 2 rates of VAT, one for food and some basic stuff, other for the rest. We have 2 rates for income tax. We also have a personal allowance, which is with higher income diminishing, disappearing. So I, for instance, cannot apply any personal allowance, but I still get child bonuses. And we increased corporate income tax rates twice, and we introduced some new rates, and basically nobody too much complained. And when I compare us to Estonia, they have even more different taxes than Slovakia has. And still World Bank, because of good administration, is considering them one of top 10 countries in the world with an excellent tax system. So just to conclude, yes, it is popular. It was important to mobilize people. It was maybe important in the situation of being the black hole of Europe to show that we are very serious, fine, but it did not touch the core of the problems. It did not help us to really put attention on what matters. Tax system as such, tax administration, tax-based definition, transfer pricing, foreign taxes, different issues. It did not prepare us for the period of time that taxes are becoming more complex because of anti-money laundering, because we want to be supporting to small enterprises, make it as simple as possible. Now, of course, it is touching most vulnerable. We don't see any effects on labor market. What really mattered was EU membership. because that was really something to become members, and later perhaps, of course, adoption of euro, which was another very positive step for many companies. We lost some instruments to provide incentives. Now, of course, we don't like to solve other issues with taxes than generate revenues, but if you don't have better instrument than taxes for some kind of behavior that you want to introduce or provide incentives for, then you simply have to use taxes. And it did not result in massive inflow of FDI. FDI, when we spoke to companies, told us all the time, yes, this is nice, we wait a year or two. What they did, first they privatized utilities, they privatized banks, they went, of course, for safer business, and only later they were coming. Now, what companies are saying, labor, quality of labor, education, this is what matters, and quality of institutions, because this is taking too much money and time from us. Rates are nice to discuss, but it's easy to change, and it's not so easy to come back once you do these simplifications, because I see no logical reason why 19, and why they should be equal, for instance. So you can do it, of course. You may have very good reasons to do it, but yeah, I think it's always good to have a basic order with stuff, like tax declaration, all taxes in one place, separation of social contributions and income taxes and other. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to pick up on the last point. It's easy to change, he said, but it's hard to come back. And I think this is what the Georgian example shows, where we have a flat tax system in place, and it seems quite hard. I wish there was a serious debate about changing it, but it's quite hard to get such a debate into place. And with that, I would like to hand over to Beka Natsvlishvili from the Georgian Parliament.
Thank you very much, Felix. First of all, I would like to thank you for the invitation and for giving the opportunity to speak with honored guests, honored public about such important issue like taxes. I had the opportunity already to meet my colleagues in Brussels 2 or some weeks ago, and we had also the discussions there. And I would like to congratulate them again and wish a lot of success in the future government. I would like to advise that don't hurry with this decision, because it is a decision, like Felix mentioned it already, to step back is quite difficult if the decision is made. You know, after the collapse of Soviet Union, almost all post-Soviet countries choose the way which was the radical opposite way of Soviet type of social order. And it was the biggest mistake, I think. Georgia was prized for his, Georgia was like, you know, star in neoliberalism, and it is still star in neoliberal politics, and some politicians are still proud of it. And we see that Georgia stay only one country, or very soon will stay only one country, which maintained flat tax. Because everybody considered already and realized that flat tax is not salvation, flat tax is not solution. We are a unique country because we have one article in the Constitution which says that we could not introduce new taxes and we could not change the taxes. We could only change the excise taxes, and the VAT. First of all, it is undemocratic because the parliament had no chance to decide about economic policy of his own country. It is unlegitimate. And the second, if we talk about politics, if we talk about the people, flat taxes are most unlegitimate tax system what we can imagine for ourselves, because with a flat tax you work as a government only for few people and not for all people. What was the reason to introduce such amendment in the Constitution? And what was the reason to introduce the flat tax in Georgia? The reason was to attract FDIs, direct foreign investments, and to have high economic growth. Yes, we attracted the FDIs, but we attracted the FDIs in the lowest productive sectors in the economy. And the second, 2007, it was the most successful year for Georgian economy according to economic growth. Our economic growth was about 11.7%. With the flat taxes, with the total deregulation, labor market total deregulation of any kind of standards. But can you remember how high was Armenian growth rate to this time? Higher as in Georgia. So it is evident that flat tax has nothing to do with economic success. Flat tax has nothing to do with economic growth. And if we see, for example, on World Economic Forum, there is a competitiveness index, and it is made from surveys from different institutions, from different businesses, and so on. Everybody is complaining in Georgia about low skill among low-skilled human capital, first, underdeveloped infrastructure, low innovation capabilities, and these are all 3 points are the points and are the challenges which could not managed from private sector. It could not manage only from the state. And if the state would not have enough money, the state could not face this problem. And we will stay still in this middle income trap in which we enter after this deregulation policy, after this Washington consensus policy, what former government did, and unfortunately, current government could not change it. What is middle income trap? Middle income trap, okay, we are not poorly middle income trap country because per capita income in Georgia is $4,400. PPP, it's purchasing power parity, according to purchasing power parity is $10,000, but we are not still middle income country in the usual understanding of it, but we are in a space of become middle income country, and it means that we just were oriented only on deregulation, on low taxes, and we passed and missed the time to invest in human capital, to invest in technologies, to invest in infrastructure, which would generate more higher growth and which would generate more higher productivity. What we are going to do? I would like to thank Felix again and Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, because it is only one foundation in Georgia which support us to fight against this neoliberal catechismo. Because, you know, we have only one chance. We are still so weak in the discussions because there is some ideological hegemony, even among experts, that only big achievement for us would be even to put this issue on the agenda to discuss publicly. And Friedrich-Ebert Foundation is supporting it very often, and the last publication prepared from Friedrich-Ebert Foundation, it's a good example for it. What we need in both countries, it is structural change of our economy, because the share of agriculture is quite high in Georgia, in Armenia. A lot of people are in Georgia, about 50% of workable people are employed in agriculture sector. And most of them are self-employed, and most of them does not pay the taxes, of course, because it is a sector, such sector. It is typical for such agriculture sector where does not exist a cooperation, where the people own only, the farmers own only small plot of the land, through which they could not participate in market economy, because it is poorly subsistence economy. And if you have so high share of subsistence economy, you couldn't collect the taxes. It is impossible. It does not matter if it's a flat, if it's progressive, whatever it is. Second, we have to develop industrial sector. We need, both countries need strong industrial policy. And to conduct this industrial policy, we need the strong state, we need the good equipped state with the money. And this money we could not collect flat, because if we take from each income group the same percentage of the money, and if we consider that in Georgia 60% of hired people get only under 1,000 lari, it is about $400. And if we take from them 20%, like we are doing it with a higher income groups, their purchasing power will decrease. And if their purchasing power will decrease, they are obliged or even pushed to go to the banks. They get the loans from the banks. They had nothing besides their small income and some, goods in the houses, and they are, after that, when they are not able anymore to pay the loans back, they are obliged to sell something, and all their property go in the hand of the banks after that, That's why we need not the flat taxation. We need progressive taxation. I remember about very good article from Colin Crouch, Privatize Keynesianism. It is excellent article. It is about it. After the deregulation, after the privatization, after the commodification of all public goods, what happened in Georgia? And I don't know how it is in Armenia. I hope not so far. The place of the state took the bank. And we live now not on our salaries in Georgia, but we live now on the bank loans. And at the end of the day, whole wealth and whole properties of Georgians will go to the banks again. What we need, we have to change in Georgia. We have to change. So with this, introduction, because I am ready to answer your questions, with this introduction, I try to show you that flat tax is not the salvation. Flat tax is not the best way, because flat tax did bring nothing to Georgia, nothing. And if we are talking about shadow economy, if we are talking about undeclared work, it is something different. Georgia does not achieve more or less higher tax collection through flat tax. It does not have something to do with the flat tax. It has more to do with the institutions. It was mentioned already here. It has more to do with tax collection institutions. It has more to do with transparency, how taxes are spent. And if we would like to attract more people to participate in the economy in the proper way, to declare their taxes, we have to create some incentives for them. We could not force the people to pay the taxes only with administrative tools. It is impossible. For example, the people which are employed in agriculture sector, we could not do it with them with such way. It is impossible. We have to create for them some incentives like we did it, but not in the way like I and Felix imagined it, pension reform. For example, if somebody does not pay the taxes, he could not participate in the pension reform. He could not get in the retirement age, get the pension. He will get only basic pension. Second, we are preparing now, for example, housing program, affordable housing. If somebody is not paying taxes, he will not have the access to this housing program, affordable housing. And these are low-income people which try to get the access to affordable housing, and so on. So we have to create some incentives. And the last point, labor inspection. Not in the countryside, not in the agriculture sector, but in the different sector where the employers does not pay the taxes for the employees and they hire the employees without contract, not to pay the taxes. If we have labor inspection, proper working labor inspection, they will oversee this process. But we did the mistake in Georgia now, because we were concentrated only on labor inspection, which is responsible for OSH, health and safety issues, and not on labor rights. That's why we have to think complex. Flat tax has nothing to do with the tax collection. I went through, okay, I will finish now. I went through the literature which is about tax collection, about flat tax, about the causalities between tax collection and flat tax. Please show me one valuable work, academic work on it, in which I will read that flat tax has something to do with the collection of taxes. No, we could not find it. Okay, thank you very much, and I am ready to answer your questions.
Thank you.
Vahram Khachadrian, economist. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to the participants. I would like to specifically thank our Deputy Minister of Finance for very well presented such good arguments. I haven't recently heard such good arguments from the members of the government. My advice would be to you to go to present, to continue the same way, because your colleagues here could not persuade me that flat tax is bad. If we are discussing it at the level of politics, or the question is directed in another way. My Georgian colleague's speech presentation was more of political nature rather than economic nature. I am a representative of liberal party, and I can also engage in political discourse, but I am now speaking as an economist. If we don't speak about the objectives and also the economic situation of the country, it is not clear. Back in 1914, during the First World War, 13% flat tax in US became 70%. After that, the US economy collapsed. And then the fathers of the US decided to go back to 14%. This is the history. We can bring more of these examples. But I would request the policy makers and economic policy makers, and especially tax policy makers, to take it very seriously as regards what are the objectives we want to meet in a country. This was well argumented by the Deputy Minister of Finance in Armenia. To lead the discussions in another way, it's not the right way. When we, for example, take the example of Macedonia, which is what has been the tax policy here in Armenia so far? Was to serve the oligarchic system. The same was in Macedonia. In corruption index, Macedonia is, I think, 89th. Armenia is 105th among the countries. So people complain of taxes because this taxation was applied selectively. The recent case of Samvel Alexanyan was very clear. 2,000 people were allowed from above not to pay income tax. Now he asked us how we're gonna work. He should work. We told him just follow the law, comply with the law. So, as regards regulations, regulation, in my perspective, is not good. Regulation is good in Denmark, in Sweden. So, do we want to improve the well-being of the population, or do we want to address social aspects, social problems? We need to make it clear. I'm ready, of course, to talk about this. So, I would like to hear about the main ways or main basics of the economic policies in your countries. I have two questions to Mr. Poghosyan. What are the lessons learned by the government and what the government can share with us as regards the tax amendments back in 2000, when it was decided to include all types of social contributions in the income tax? What was its impact on the welfare, well-being of the population in terms of tax burden and labor? So what are the lessons learned from that experience? My question is very relevant in regard that the representative of Slovakia spoke about the importance of social contribution, to separate the social contribution. This is very important. So after a decade or 15 years later, you are again introducing changes to income tax, and what are the lessons learned based on which you are proposing such changes? And the second question, I would like to clarify from the panelist from Slovakia. increase in FDI after 2007. To what extent was this thanks to getting them joining the EU? And to what extent was it conditioned by different types of infrastructure and other investments coming from the EU? Was this were these really FDI targeted to developing domestic infrastructure, or these were simply larger infrastructure projects which just came or affected also your country? So from structural perspective, we would like to hear in which sectors of economy these investments were made in order for us to understand whether it had benefits for labor force and for getting jobs. Mostly theoretical aspects were covered here, but we see it is apparent for us that flat taxation cannot be applied in a country where there is such a huge difference among high and income earners, and even more so when there is no middle class. This is apparent. However, I would like to ask another question. One of the colleagues actually spoke about this. So, very often, these debates seem to be theoretical, how to do, what to do to make the sector work properly. But let's not forget that in Armenia, as well as in other countries, according to different assessments, there is shadow economy and even gray economy. So my question is as follows. All these theoretical conclusions, to what extent they will change, having in mind such a huge share of shadow economy in the country, which is actually outside or beyond the tax administration?
Thank you very much. I have the impression now it's always hard, not only for policymakers but also for conference organizers, to make everybody happy. I have the impression now for some it was too theoretical and for others it was too practical. And this is exactly the challenge we have. We have to sort of bridge this divide. We have theoretical implications for practical policy, and I think we try to compose the panel in such a way that we always have the combination of both. Maybe in the final round before the coffee break, for which we have about 10 minutes, so roughly 3-4 minutes for every one of you. You see, I'm not good at math. I'm a political scientist, not an economist, so that's my problem. Maybe you can also reflect on this, saying where you had theoretical expectations that did not come true in practical policy. And I would suggest that we start with Anton and then move to the panel and end with Dragan Tevdovski from Macedonia. Yeah. So Anton, you were directly addressed, and
so I will try to be really short. The question was how to tax oligarchs, and the answer is that I'm quite sure that flat tax has almost nothing to do with that. It's a real problem for all countries. Now, social contributions, I think, yes, there is different role of social contributions than of general taxes, so they should be separated, and that's why I think they are separated. Entitlements from social insurance are completely different. And FDI in Slovakia, well, number one, of course, it was important. The security issue was done by NATO membership, and the EU membership provided, the thing that, export, import, all these barriers were removed. So this was number one, EU membership. For job creation, they got investment stimuli. All these companies get very nice investment stimuli for each job created. So they don't care too much about the cost of labor. And it's cheaper than on the West. And at the same time, labor in neighboring countries was already absorbed by capital, by FDI. Slovakia was a bit delayed, as I told you. So the only labor available in the region, which was educated and so on, was actually in Slovakia. For the corporate income tax and other taxes, they don't matter at all because they get tax holidays for quite a few years, and even if they did not, because the huge investment was made, they would not qualify for paying taxes anyway. So what they really wanted was roads, infrastructure, and recently they speak about education centers and really about secondary schools and about quality of labor. Now, shadow economy, I can tell you that Slovakia used to be the second country just behind Greece in VAT the opposite, evasions, thank you. VAT evasions. So Greece was number one, Slovakia was the second. Despite the fact that we had 19% VAT rate and so on, we lost billions of euros. And the only answer is institutions. It takes time, it's difficult, it's very detailed, professional work. But if you want to collect real taxes, go for institutions, for really good tax offices, administration, control. It all exists. It's just necessary to copy it. And that's what we did. We just copied it from other countries. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Poghosyan.
Thank you. It seems that there was one key question addressed to me. Let me reflect on it and make a few comments. So, what are the lessons learned from the previous periods? You may well remember that by 2013, the taxation system had there was some quietness in the tax system. We had progressive income tax in place, and major changes started in 2013, which was directly linked with the implementation of the compulsory pension framework, which led to joining the tax system and social contributions framework. In that phase, there were three main objectives set for the government. First, to make to bring this together in such a way as not to reduce the income for the persons employed, and second, so not to increase the cost of employers on labor, on salaries, and third, to ensure that the government revenues are not decreased. This led to the irrational. So there was, before adoption of tax code, there were quite irrational tax rates, 24, 26 with something, and then 36%, three types of brackets, which was not well based on economic justifications arguments. It was simply a result of addressing concrete tasks. When there was question asked to experts, how did you come up with this tax rates, there was no answer, and there was no real progressive system in place. I don't want to repeat myself. Actually, we had some progress thanks to the tax code. There was some progressivity vested in the tax code. I hope in the second part of our meeting I can present you some graphs on this. However, I thank you for the question. To be frank, I have short comment on each of the questions, but I don't have time for it. Let's leave it to the second part of our meeting. Thank you.
It was mentioned that it's a political discussion, or my point of view was political. Excuse me, I'm politician, I'm not accountant, so that's why I have the political point of view. Shadow economy. shadow economy. As a politician also, maybe it was not enough, but I tried to show how Georgia is fighting against shadow economy, because we have still higher share of shadow economies in Armenia, despite we have the flat tax. But we try to fight against shadow economy through institution, through transparency of budget, through, it is my desire to introduce more proper labor inspection and to create more incentive for the people to participate in non-shadow economy, in the market economy. I did not understand, frankly speaking, from the questions that, was it about tax burdens generally, the questions, or about flat tax or not? Because maybe tax burden in Armenia is high, I don't know. I could not estimate it, if it's high or not. We are talking now about flat tax or progressive taxation. And I am for progressive taxation, because if we would not introduce in Georgia soon progressive taxation, we could not collect enough money. One example, we made the profit tax reform 2 years ago. According to this reform, everybody which, every company which will reinvest the money, he will be free from corporate taxes. But we faced it after that big problems that we would have big deficit in the budget. Because of the constitutional amendment, what we have, according which we could not raise the taxes, and only we could touch excise. We increased excise on fuel and on tobacco. Instead of it, we could raise the income tax, for example, for the higher income, or raise the taxes for 1% from each. We would get the same amount of money through this step as we increase the excise tax on fuel. And we had very high inflation exactly on the goods, which are the goods through which the people meet their daily needs. Because indirect taxes are the taxes which charge more low-income people as higher-income people. And if we will manipulate every time with indirect taxes, suffer will only low-income people as higher-income people. And that's why I'm talking about legitimacy of flat tax. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And, well, my microphone is resisting to work, so finally.
Maybe because I have.
Thank you very much for the questions. So regarding fight against corruption, so it is obvious that, and against criminal, it is matter of the institutions. So it is not progressive or flat. It's how the institutions function. In my country, in 2016, we had also peaceful revolution. There was a change of the government, and one of the most important goals in that time, it was introduction of the transparency, especially fiscal transparency, as necessary step of fight against the criminal and corruption. So since that, in the past 2 years, we start to, for example, Ministry of Finance, to make publication of details of how the monthly reports of how money are spent. Also, we made legislative obligation, every public procurement contract amendment to be visible and published in the web in order the citizens' media to have knowledge of every detail of public spending and to make pressure if there is some problems in it. So this is these were the first steps. We are now working, and probably during the March we will publish the treasury of the Ministry of Finance on our website. So details of spending of public money will be visible for the citizens in real time. This is some more radical form. We copied this example from Slovenia. Regarding the shadow economy and selection in paying taxes. So in the Balkans especially, we want to change the past system of discretionary power of people in the public revenue office, in the government, and want to replace with the IT systems and with the system in general. So we, starting from last year, in my country, we make the new IT system, which have details of transaction of the citizens, and it is taken from the banks, also from the companies, and for example, in the purposes of the personal income taxation, at the end of the year, it will send to the citizens and will say if this is right, if yes, check, say yes, if not, say what. This is something in some of the European Union countries have. So fight against this type of tax evasion could be made if we replace the discretionary power of the people in the institution with the system. Regarding the flat tax, I must underline, there was many studies. They show two things. Market Gini, it is indicator how the fruits and the awards in the economy in terms of the salaries, dividends, rents are distributed in the economy. And for example, most of the Balkan countries by this indicator are same like, for example, Germany. So market Gini is around 45%, and it means that market, there is an inefficiency of how market distribute the awards in the economy. But there is another measure, it is net Gini. It is what is the income inequality after the work of the taxation and the social transfers. If you see this, so Germany, in Germany, for example, there is a significant reduction of the inequality, but in the countries with the flat taxation, the net Gini is almost the same as the market Gini. It means that there is no redistribution of the taxation, how the taxes are collected, and then how the social transfers are provided to the citizens. Regarding, so one of the questions was taxation of the oligarch. I must underline that we discussed today mostly about the income inequality, about the personal income taxation, and that accumulation of the income inequalities brings much higher inequality in the property, in the wealth. So the tool for improvement of this is better taxation of the property. So most of the country of my region, Southern Eastern Europe, have very low level of taxation of the property. It means that also this redistribution of mechanism is not put in place. But some of the countries, they start to undertake some also progressive types of taxation of property in order to make a redistribution, especially of the wealth. The problem possibly in the Central and Eastern Europe, in Southern Eastern Europe, is that we first do not have a right list of the property of our citizens. Thank you.
Okay, it works again. Thank you very much for this very insightful first round.